Chairman, is the minister coming back? Do we know?
He's coming. Please continue.
Because I would have liked to have joined my honourable colleagues in congratulating the finance minister on his budget speech, the longest budget speech, I think, in living memory. In fact, my dear friend Sudhir Bandyopadhyay was actually wrong when he held the two speeches up and said that Mr. Chidambaram's and his were equal in length. Mr. Jaitley spoke 16,473 words for nearly 2 hours and a half, whereas Mr. Chidambaram spoke 6,581 in less than 1 hour. No, but last year. I'm talking about last year. No, last. So the result is real inflation here, from 6,000 to 14,000. But still, since we know it was back-breaking work for the minister, we should be sympathetic. Now, after hearing my friend Mr. Jaitley's views on the UPA's budgets over the last 5 years, I must confess I'm a bit disappointed at his own budget's lack of big, bold ideas, to cite a phrase he's often used against the UPA. For the last decade, the BJP has been critical of the UPA's budgets. We could have assumed they had a pretty good idea of what they would have offered in our place. Some path-breaking reforms, some radical departures from the UPA policies, and of course a few of Prime Minister Modi's bitter pills. We got none. Instead, we got 29 projects that have been allocated 100 crores each, like Bollywood box office hits. You know, a budget cannot be a laundry list of assorted 100 crore sops to various constituencies. We do understand these are meant to be initial allocations for this year alone and not complete numbers for these projects, but there should be a vision, a clear policy direction behind all of these. Where is that? These 100 crore allocations actually raise real questions about the mindset of the government in this regard. What is the desired overall outcome? How does each 100 crores serve that objective? For example, a mere 100 crores for gender security is meaningless when there is not enough outlay for core sovereign functions like law and order, as Mr. Tambidurai pointed out. The Honorable Jayant Sinha said that the economy is like a battleship, but clearly this ship is not ready yet for battle. But anyway, in keeping with Mr. Jaitley's own preferences when he was in opposition, let me just stick to the big picture. What are the big questions we need to ask about the budget? First, as this is a new government, does it have an overall vision? Is it clear how it's going to be implemented? Second, have the economy's problems been diagnosed properly, and is there a prescription to fix these remedies? Third, who gains and who loses from this budget? And fourth, does it live up to the expectations generated by the ruling party's own statements when it was in opposition? I'm sorry to say there are serious grounds for disappointment in analysing the budget along these questions. What does the Aam Aadmi look for in the budget, Mr. Chairman? At the personal level, everyone wants more income and a lower cost of living. At the macro level, policies that will create growth and job opportunities, that will reduce prices, that will widen each person, each Indian's life prospects. India needs an economy which is efficient, which is competitive, and which at the same time, in an era of growing inequality, is also humane. We haven't got that from this budget. In fact, in his Rajya Sabha speech on the UPA's 2012 budget, Mr. Jaitley said that the budget should help increase, and I'm quoting him, the width and volume of economic activity. Now that's a pretty good yardstick, but his own budget has failed to meet it. Where is the roadmap for national recovery? Any budget today, you ask any economist, has to address 5 issues. Fiscal consolidation, that is a policy aimed at reducing government deficits and debt accumulation. Job creation through boosting manufacturing. Increasing savings in order to boost investments. Inflation control, price rise, and improving investor sentiment, both domestic and foreign, so that we can have more growth revival. Now you can throw into this list a few subsidiary points, as some of the speakers today have done, sound tax policies, energy policies, human resource development incentives, issues of banking and pensions. And we don't have time to address each one of these in detail, but the finance minister did, and he didn't fully address any. Take one item, manufacturing, where the honourable member from the BJP blamed the UPA. To be internationally competitive, Mr. Chairman, India requires policies that will reduce the cost of manufacturing, affordable interest rates, improved infrastructure, better trade facilitation, lower cost of power, and so on. And one of the key reasons for the fall of our GDP growth has been the slowing down in the index of industrial production. This government's budget hasn't addressed any of these, let alone having a coherent vision. You're not going to get manufacturing just by announcing you're going to create more factories. All of these policies are required, they're missing. Now, for a government that has long deprecated the UPA's alleged indecisiveness, there were no concrete decisions on offer in any of these or any other of our country's fiscal priorities. For instance, after decrying UPA's policies for years, the Honourable Finance Minister announced no decision on introducing the direct tax code. Instead, he gave us a series of committees: an Expenditure Management Commission, a high-level committee of the CBDT on retrospective taxation, another committee to interact with industry on taxation, a fourth committee to examine MSMEs. This from a party that routinely blamed the UPA for delegating decision-making to groups of ministers. Now, on the Expenditure Management Commission, which they're all so excited about, we've actually heard this story before. The Atal Bihari Vajpayee government had an Expenditure Reforms Commission, headed by Shri K.P. Geeta Krishnan. Its report, which covered 36 subject areas, was consigned to the archives. As usual, a commission becomes an excuse for inaction. So I must ask the government, how many times must the wheel be reinvented for the NDA's engine to start cranking? No specific measures were announced to reduce inflation. Price rise, you would all agree, is the worst kind of tax on the poor. The fact is, the issue that most hurts the Aam Aadmi is price rise. But the party that rode to power on public resentment of high prices had no inflation-busting solutions to offer. In fact, the cuts in fuel subsidies by about 22,000 crores is going to ensure that prices of petrol and diesel will keep going up. That will lead to a cascading impact on other commodities and, needless to say, price rise for everybody. We could at least have hoped that the Finance Minister would say that he encourages and supports the Reserve Bank of India to manage interest rate policies that complement the fiscal efforts to reduce inflation, but he didn't even do that. He didn't address this concern. People below the poverty line have got short shrift in the focus on the so-called neo-middle class that we hear about from the BJP. But for aspirational young Indians, there is no indication of where the new jobs will come from for the 12 million young people who are entering the employment market in our country each year. Let me turn briefly and boringly to the macroeconomic perspective, because there are real worries, Mr. Chairman, about how the Finance Minister will achieve any fiscal consolidation with this budget. After accusing the UPA of fudging the numbers in claiming a fiscal deficit of 4.6%, the NDA budget now accepts these numbers, but it gives no specifics about how it will bring it down to 4.1%, a target it endorsed. In fact, the Finance Minister bases his deficit calculations on a nearly 20% increase in revenue, which, in a year of a slow growth period in our lives, is implausible. Some of his budget numbers just strain credulity. Tax revenues are projected well above GDP growth. I mean, let's accept that nominal GDP growth is extremely unlikely to exceed 13 to 14%. That is 5% real growth and about 9% inflation. It also defies credibility because already in the first quarter of this fiscal year, 45% of the annual deficit number has already been reached. Now, despite just having a 6% growth in customs revenues last year, the government has budgeted a 15% jump in customs revenue this year. On what basis? The fine print shows, in fact, that the government expects 99,000 crores from non-tax revenue. Where's that coming from, if not from selling national assets? Yet the Honourable Finance Minister didn't even mention the word disinvestment in his speech. Still, disinvestment proceeds for this year are projected to rise from 25,000 crore in 2013-14 to 63,000 crore in 2014-15, much higher than the interim budget of Mr. Chidambaram should have done. I think in his reply to this debate, the Finance Minister needs to spell out exactly what he will do on disinvestment. Which bits of the family silver is he planning to sell off? In fact, the budget, if I may quote the international rating agency Moody's, the budget lacks details on revenue and expenditure measures to lower the deficit, making it difficult to assess the likelihood that future deficit targets will be met, unquote, says Moody's. Now, I'm sure the Honourable Jayant Sinha can tell us, will foreign investors listen to Moody's views or Modi's views? Anyway, on the other side of the picture, let's turn to taxes from the Aam Aadmi's point of view. As leader of the opposition, Arun Jaitley had demanded that the IT exemption limit be raised to 5 lakhs, which he has not been able to fulfill as Finance Minister. The very fact that the BJP's promise of increasing the exemption limit to 5 lakhs has resulted only in a 25% increase from 2 to 2.5, has disappointed people across the country. So we've lost on both sides. As I said, on the macroeconomic side, which the finance minister, but I'm sure we briefed on later, and the average taxpayer, who, as my colleague pointed out, will only save 416 rupees a month, which won't even cover the increased price of tomatoes, onion, sugar, and milk for a family of 4 today. Similarly, no comprehensive roadmap to step up the country's tax to GDP ratio, which is at a low level of 17%. No measures to address the lack of progressivity in the country's tax structure, which depends on indirect taxes to the extent of 2/3 of our total tax revenue. Now, in the absence of clear measures, as I've explained, on tax collection, on tax revenues, on efficiency of tax collection, how will the NDA manage the fiscal deficit? Won't there inevitably be cuts in development expenditure? The persistent inflation is in large part due to government borrowings and is the cause of the high interest rates that have hurt investment, consumption, and job creation. So clearly, debt must be reduced, even retired altogether. We agree there with the Honorable Finance Minister, who said in his speech, we cannot leave behind a legacy of debt for future generations. Yet this year, in his budget, the government of India will spend more than it did last year, borrow more than it did last year. Approximately 69 crore rupees an hour will be borrowed by this government, and spend more on subsidies than it did last year. How is he going to retire the debt? The budget did not spell out clear plans for rationalizing these subsidies, recapitalizing public sector banks, did not repeal the retrospective tax amendment that was expected by the investing community. In fact, the economic survey, which the finance minister himself presented to us the day before the budget, envisaged reducing direct taxes to the ASEAN level, an FRBM Act with real teeth, food stamps, cash transfers instead of subsidies goods, but Mr. Jaitley has avoided all these reforms. No wonder the BSE Sensex extended its losing streak to a 5th straight day, during which the blue chip index actually shed over 1,000 points. So while the 100 crore giveaways make it look like a something for everybody budget, the stock market reaction proves that it's really a not enough for anybody budget. Agriculture, one area in which our country has actually been doing quite well, has been woefully neglected by the NDA budget. In a year where farmers are particularly vulnerable to a bad monsoon, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme, it's a good idea, but is 100 crores really going to go very far in a country where 67% of our population is rural and 65% is young? How can you manage to tackle their needs in that kind of time? Mr. Chairman, you had promised us a little more time.
Thanks. Take 2 minutes.
I wanted to address pensions. Instead of addressing some of the needs of poor people, I mean, I've got pensioners in my constituency who are trying to live on 500 rupees a month. We've not seen a significant increase there. We've not seen any proposals on employee contributions to life and health insurance, which could have been made mandatory, as with the Provident Fund. But all these easy wins have been spurned. Instead, we have grand, uneconomic, unviable ideas like the bullet trains. A classic example of the NDA going on the wrong track, the gap between dreams and reality. And you can talk all you want about affordable housing and 100 smart cities, but where is the land available to build them? Now, as my colleague has pointed out, the NDA adopted a number of UPA policies it had earlier criticized and blocked. But on the goods and services tax, which we're very pleased they've adopted, and which they had opposed when their state governments had opposed, we are again concerned with the lack of a specific deadline or specific assurances to the states. The various schemes that have already been mentioned that have actually been renamed demonstrates once again that this is not a game-changing budget, but a name-changing budget. There's a lot more to be said, Mr. Chairman. I just want to conclude with two last words. I do want to stress that women have done very badly out of this budget, because we've got some concerns about the lack of addressing the problems of their security, their education, the balance between the money allocated to them. Even the National Crime Records Bureau says there's been a 26% increase in crimes against women. There's been not even a 2% increase in the budget allocated to women. But let me conclude, since the Finance Minister did not favor us with the usual couplets that we've been used to in budget speeches, I thought I should offer him a couplet or two that are appropriate to the story. The first, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, since Mr. Jaitley would appreciate this, I'm sure. Kahan to तय था उजाला हर घर के लिए, कहाँ तो तय था उजाला हर घर के लिए, कहाँ चिराग मयसर नहीं शहर के लिए. The promise was to illuminate every home, not even a lamp lights up the city today. But we on this side of the house are not surprised, Mr. Chairman. Final word from the immortal Ghalib, as he put it, तेरे वादे पर जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना. तेरे वादे पर जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना कि खुशी से मर न जाते अगर इतबार होता. I live by your promise, though I knew it was false. Wouldn't I have died of happiness if I had believed it to be true? I think we'd rather that the NDA government will help us to die of happiness, Mr. Chairman, than to live in false hope. Thank you very much.